Matt Walsh says mutilating children is evil. Jack Posobiec calls for Christian men to build families, lead their communities, and defend their nation. Thousands of young conservatives are rejecting drag culture, open borders, and the death spiral of liberal democracy. And now, all of a sudden, they're being called woke. James Lindsay, an atheist, once co-belligerent against the excesses of the left, is sounding the alarm, not against Antifa and not against the left, but actually against the right itself. See, in his eyes, anyone who speaks in terms of collective identity, national destiny, or religious authority has gone off the rails. He's adopted the phrase woke right to describe these people. But let's be clear. These men are not dressing up Marxist categories in red, white, and blue, and they're not crying victim while their group identity is simultaneously being advantaged. They're not co-opting oppressive narratives falsely. Instead, they're simply rejecting a hollow system that tells Christians to keep quiet, to keep their faith private, and to keep the public square morally sterile. The people being called woke right are those saying enough is enough. They're done pretending that drag queen story hour is a constitutional blessing. They're done pretending that open borders are a civic virtue. And they're done pretending that America can survive without a spine or even a soul. James Lindsay wants a right that fights the left, but only within the boundaries of Enlightenment liberalism. That is secular, individualistic, and morally neutral. But those boundaries are exactly what led us here. And now the people trying to build something rooted, biblical, and bold are being smeared as radicals. This episode is brought to you by our premier sponsors, Armored Republic and Reese Fund, as well as our Patreon members and our generous donors. You can join our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Right Response Ministries, or you can make a donation by going to rightresponseministries.com/donate. So today, we're pulling the mask off the term woke right. Who's using it? Why are they using it? And what it reveals about the real lines being drawn on the right. So let's dive in. GA, we are back.
We are back. Not Wes, though.
Not Wes. Yeah. Wes is gone. He's in Hawaii, going to a wedding with his family. And so I'm sure he'll just have a difficult time suffering for the cause of Christ in Hawaii. He'll be back soon. So we'll have Wes joining us in the near future. For today, we're going to be talking about James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson, the two of them, Jordan Peterson. Stein, I think, is appropriate. I mean, he did partner with the ADL. And a lot of this does, it should make you angry. You should be righteously indignant, and in your anger do not sin, as the Bible says. But yeah, you should be frustrated that a guy who was a hero to young men for almost a decade, and who the Lord in his common grace, right. Jordan Peterson is not a Christian, but in his common grace, God used Jordan Peterson, Peter Stein, I've heard it both ways. God used him to do a lot of good for a young man, to not just play the victim, to make your bed, clean your room, and he exercised a lot of courage against a lot of NGOs, non-governmental organizations that were putting immense pressure on people in this kind of first wave of wokeness that ramped up in the early 2000 teens, right. But especially 2015 leading to Obergefell, and then certainly 2017, 18, 19, and then really reached its climax in 2020. And so Jordan Peterson, came on the scene and launched into the stratosphere by refusing to use LGBT pronouns and was resisting forced speech. That was kind of what put him on the map. His refusal to be forced to use certain forms of speech. But then even recently, we've seen him partner with the ADL. So the same kind of NGOs and groups that were trying to destroy Jordan Peterson, where his resistance to those NGOs is precisely what made him famous and made him a hero in many people's eyes. And now he's actually not just starting to compromise or no longer resisting these organizations, but actually giving these organizations, the same ones, the right hand of fellowship, and partnering with them against what he perceives as being anti-Semitic. Right. So the whole Christ is King controversy, we did an episode on that recently. Feel free to go back and watch it. But now he's just recently had James Lindsay on his show, and they're talking about the woke right. What is the woke right? And it's ironic because, Jordan Peterson is one of the personalities and host on the Daily Wire network. And Matt Walsh has had actually, I think, a lot of great commentary over the last couple of days in regards to this whole idea of the woke right. And Matt's not really having it. He's doing a good job and saying, no, this is not a thing. And if it is, then I guess I'm woke right. And so it's ironic to see, Matt Walsh, who is also with the Daily Wire. We'll see for how long, but he's with the Daily Wire. I think there's actually a path. I'd love to see him leave the Daily Wire, but to be honest, there's a path for him staying on at the Daily Wire for a long time, just because Matt Walsh is a cash cow. I guarantee you that he is bringing in probably the most profitable personality with the Daily Wire at this point, especially with his documentaries, What is a Woman? And Am I Racist? And as Ben Shapiro continues to, in my assessment, show more of his colors of being Israel first, having someone like Matt Walsh, who Ben Shapiro would disagree with and has disagreed with for quite some time on some of these issues. But I think, I don't know if Shapiro can really afford to get rid of some of the differing opinions on his network after losing Candace Owens and losing Brett
Cooper.
Brett Cooper. I think that Matt Walsh in many ways is one of the last guys on the Daily Wire that a lot of people trust. And so he could be there for a while. But the point is, there was an irony in seeing Jordan Peterson, who's with the Daily Wire, hosting James Lindsay, and Matt Walsh, who is also a personality contributor with the Daily Wire, and then seeing James Lindsay in the same 48-hour window, James Lindsay and Matt Walsh going back and forth and back and forth. And James Lindsay is on with Jordan Peterson, and as his episode is airing, he's simultaneously on X calling, Matt Walsh a midwit. Because Matt Walsh had a different take from Ben Shapiro and others in regards to the Shiloh controversy. Some are calling her Joan of Park.
Yeah, I saw that in the chat.
Instead of Joan of Arc, Joan of Park. This is the tattooed white woman who had a young toddler that she's holding in her arms, and who allegedly, and I think it's probably true, we just don't have the video of her speaking to this young black boy who we're told is autistic and we're told is 5, although he's about the height of an average 10 to 12-year-old, which it's possible that he's just a big boy. So I don't know. I don't have omniscience or any secret intel on the matter, but I'm just saying he definitely looks like a child who's older than 5. But this is the woman who allegedly used the N-word when telling this boy to stop stealing the contents from her purse. And then a Somalian who was there at the park, started recording her on his phone and then uploaded it, and then it was taken down, but then somebody else had found it and they re-uploaded it, and then a GoFundMe was started because she has to kind of uproot her entire life and find a new address and a new school for her children. Her social security number was doxed, her name, extended family members, her address, all these kinds of things. And so a lot of predominantly white people came to her aid. And Matt Walsh, his take on this whole situation was saying, if this is what it takes to once and for all, maybe this is the cusp. Right. Maybe this is the once and for all, America saying we are done with cancel culture.
Right.
We're not doing it anymore. And Matt Walsh wasn't saying, and so therefore we should start using the N-word, especially on playgrounds with children.
Right.
That's not what he was saying.
Right.
But what he is saying is that although it's an unsavory word, and that particular use of it, I certainly would not advise. However, to dox her address, her school, her children, her parents, and extended family members and social security number, Doxing, especially to that degree, on an issue that is this sensitive in our American context, it is. And people will say, well, this is hyperbolic or this is extreme. But no, I think it really is legitimate. To dox someone on this issue to that extent, it is tantamount to murder. What you're doing is putting a hit on someone and saying it's open season.
Joel, some of the videos that I saw where just as people were trying to figure out who she was, I saw videos on X where people went on and they said, well, it's not just the mom. We've got to find the kid too.
I saw that too.
And the kid, I'll put it more politely, but basically needs some sense knocked into it to not come out racist. And it was to the tune of needs to be made unconscious for long periods of time.
Physically knocked unconscious. I saw that. And this was not parody. This was not humorous. This was a black man, deadly serious, saying that someone needs to find her child, her 2-year-old, 3-year-old child, and beat them unconscious. And so to dox someone on this kind of issue when racial tensions in our country are currently this high, is tantamount to murder. And so Matt Walsh, his position was not saying, so let's all start using the N-word on a regular basis, especially with children on playgrounds. That wasn't his position. That's not what he was communicating. What he was communicating is that people are saying, no, we're not going to allow this woman, even if we wouldn't have done it ourselves, even if we would have used some other kind of language, we're not going to allow a random woman with her toddler son to have her entire life destroyed, simply because she said a naughty word. We're done with that. America is done with that. That is the essence of cancel culture, is that you make a mistake. And I know that plenty would disagree with me and say, well, she didn't make a mistake. She called the boy a certain word because he was behaving in that moment as a certain word. I still would not have done it. I would have used other words. Thief.
Right.
You're being a thief. Stop that. Where are your parents? Yep. Why are you unsupervised? Why are you taking things that are not yours? Right. You need to go home. Do you need me to call your parents? And if he started to mouth off, I'm going to call the police to come and get you, to take you home. Right. You do not behave this way. So I think there's a way of dealing with it without using that particular language. However, that said, using a certain word, a magical word, we either have free speech or we don't. Now, there are social consequences for the words that we use. So free speech doesn't mean that there are no social consequences. Yep. But when the social consequences are as high as putting a hit on someone's child to beat them unconscious, potentially to the point of death, no, those are not normal consequences. If somebody is regularly using unsavory speech in a foolish way, and it causes them to not be the most popular person in the workplace, it causes them not to have a whole bunch of friends, that's one thing. But when it causes them to have their social security number and address doxed publicly to millions of people, and then videos, dozens and dozens of videos coming out saying, find her, hurt her child, that is not just normal social consequences. That is cancel culture in its essence. And so everyone rushing to Shiloh's support, are there some people who just are rushing to her support because they just hate black people? Maybe. Yep. But there's also a ton of people that I've seen, even in the comments on the GoFundMe, who are like, yeah, I wouldn't have used the word, but I'm still going to give her some money because it is worth my money to send a message to say, we here in America are done with cancel culture. And we're done with a double standard. This is where, a lot of people, people were saying, well, how come black people can say the N-word dozens of times a day? And it's in every rap song. It's in their movies and media, and they're saying it laughing, and it's, no. And they can also say, it'd be one thing is, well, we can say it because it's about ourselves. Well, black people also say cracker and honky.
Did you see the clip? I think it was today. I wish I would have had time to clip it and put it in for today, but it was on Piers Morgan.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Did you see this? Where there's a panel on there, and there's a white woman and 2 black guys, and I think 2 white guys. And the white woman is mad about the double standard. And Piers Morgan, he's not actually hoping she'll say the word, but he says to her, say the word.
Yes.
Right. And so then the liberal black guy goes absolutely ballistic.
Don't you tell her to
Don't
say
you
the
tell
word.
her to
It's
say
going to
that.
hurt me.
Yep. But he says that would be an offense against me. And he said, I'm the only, and in the same breath, I'm the only black guy up here. The guy next to me is an Uncle Tom. It's like he cannot have the N-word said in his presence.
Right.
But he can revile and slander the
Another-
guy next
another
to
person
him
of
within
color.
the same breath.
Correct.
There is a massive double standard here.
You're right. And then that guy, I think a little bit later, took out a toy gun and pulled the trigger, and it had written out a flag that said the N-word, so which was kind of funny. But the point is, that's just giving our audience the background.
Yeah.
So Matt Walsh comes out, and I think had really good cultural analysis.
We're gonna show some of his tweets.
Really good cultural analysis in regards to this Shiloh. Is it Hendricks? Is that her last name?
Yes.
In this Shiloh Hendricks incident, and James Lindsay, of course, was not having it. He did not appreciate that, and then ironically, he goes on Jordan Peterson's show, who's both Matt Walsh and Jordan are on the Daily Wire, and so it's this I don't know, multifaceted, messy kind of situation. But it's fascinating, and so what we want to focus on, because we've already done an episode on Shiloh Hendricks, but what we want to focus on is James Lindsay on the episode with Jordan Peterson, talking about what it is to be woke right. And I think that James Lindsay, I watched it, and I think he did an excellent job.
Yeah.
I really do.
Brought
Because
some clarity to the conversation.
yeah, because what he ultimately portrayed is that being woke right means nothing. And I mean, he articulated that about as well as anyone could. It was a perfect word salad that demonstrated, I think, profoundly that woke right is nothing. And so that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. I'm going to hand it to you, Michael, and I know we want to get to some clips, but go ahead.
Well, I think we should jump into that clip here in just a second. So I'll just set it up. This is from the beginning of the interview, and Jordan Peterson is basically asking Lindsay about this term, woke right, and what it is and where it came from. And if you've been around the internet some, this is a term that maybe is confusing to you. It was a bit confusing. It still is a little bit confusing to me. But rest assured, James Lindsay is here to help at least sort out the definitions so we have an even playing field. We know what we're arguing about. So let us all take great advantage from what he offers here to the public discourse.
Great.
It's a fraught term, right? People see it as paradoxical because you have woke, which they associate with left. You have right, which they associate obviously with the right. And so now you've got a paradox. And so I've caused myself some trouble by calling a radical segment, not the whole right, a radical segment of the right, woke right, which I kind of started doing, I guess, last fall, September. I started using it before that, the term. I didn't invent the term. A lot of people accuse me of inventing the term or credit me with it. This term has been in rough circulation, floating around in the internet space for at least since middle of 22. So it's not a brand new term. I just adopted it and went kind of hard about it. And the simplest explanation I give people for, well, what do you mean by woke right? How does that make sense? And I say, well, it's woke people who call themselves conservatives. And some of them don't, though. They call themselves right wing. And they distinguish that conservatives and right wing are different. But it's woke people. So the whole suite of behaviors, beliefs, even the deep metaphysical constructs underneath those beliefs. And as you recently pointed out, I think the psychology that generates those beneath all of that, the cluster B personality disorders are presenting, and the psychopathologies, psychopathy itself sometimes, all of that kind of feeds upward into this concept of woke, which I think we, can talk pretty fruitfully about. But I don't believe it can only be presented through, left-wing causes. You can present it in terms of right-wing causes or religious causes or other causes, because it's the pathological expression of an ideology or of a belief structure that ultimately is woke.
The pathology of a belief structure that ultimately is woke.
Right. So
super helpful.
But yeah, not telling us what is it? So part of the reason James Lindsay can't say what woke right is, I don't think it's just incompetence. I really think it's dishonesty. So I'll take a crack at it. We all remember that the term woke, that it arose during a time where basically, because I remember I was in Acts 29, which is a church planting network that went woke. It's the same network that was started by Mark Driscoll and then kicked out Mark Driscoll. And the moment they kicked out Mark Driscoll, they also conveniently, right at the same time, abandoned a lot of orthodoxy. Was Mark Driscoll maybe holding back the tide of liberal insanity in that movement? I mean, honestly, each year that goes by kind of vindicates Mark Driscoll a little bit more and more and more, especially within Acts 29. It was much better with him than after he was removed. But I entered in, our church entered into Acts 29 in 2014, and I pulled our church out of Acts 29 towards the end of 2018, right after Eric Mason, who was one of the board members and a close friend of Matt Chandler, who replaced Mark Driscoll as the president of Acts 29. It was right after Eric Mason wrote a book called Woke Church. And I remember every single conference and every single speaker at every single conference and every panel, it was all about being woke. And Eric Mason at this time, this is before, the term woke ended up being, more of a pejorative, because eventually, because wokeness lost, and it handedly lost at the ballot box in 2024, both the electoral and the popular vote. America's really done with wokeness, but in 2018, it was cool, So Eric Mason was perfectly fine using that term in the title of his book, Woke Church, and what he's insinuating is that the church needs to get woke. And so what does it mean to be woke? Well, I read his book, and I remember him speaking at the conferences. It meant to wake up to something particular, to wake up to the social and judicial and systematic injustices occurring in America towards people of color.
Right.
That's what wokeness was. To be woke was to be awake, and awake to what? Awake to, I see, I'm not just looking at ones and zeros anymore, but I can see into the matrix, and I'm perfectly aware of the systematic injustice towards minorities, particularly Black people.
And I would just add that has gone back to the beginning of the American project, all the way from the very beginning. So it wasn't even
not just in that
right
moment.
Now. Yes.
Yeah, you're right.
Yep.
You're right. And that's where the 1619 project and all these different things arose, and saying like that there's a revisionist history of America's so not just I'm aware of the system as it currently is and the ways that it's duplicitous and sinister towards people of color, minorities, particularly Black people, but that America always has been this way, and that our entire nation was founded upon injustice. And so that's what it meant to be woke. It meant to be awake to both the origin and history and founding of America in its injustice towards Black people and the current present day systems, judicially and also economically, and with corporations and with judges, with certain laws, and how all of it was to favor white people, that white people are privileged, and that people of color, minorities, particularly Black people, are at a disadvantage. I'm woke, meaning I'm awake to that reality. So when James Lindsay, here's the point, when he says woke right, what he means, and he can't really just say it out loud, because then, it becomes fairly obvious what he's doing and how deceitful he's actually being. But to say it's the same thing. It's tomato, tomato. There's woke people on the left and there's woke people on the right. Well, what did it mean to be woke, the only wokeness that actually exists on the left? It was to be aware of injustices towards one group of people. The people that he's now calling woke on the right are people who are claiming, they're asserting that there are certain injustices, but they're injustices not towards Black people, not towards minorities, but there are certain injustices on the books currently in present day against the hegemony, against heritage Americans, and predominantly against white Americans. And so James Lindsay looks at that and says, tomato, tomato. You can be woke in one direction and you can be woke in the other. You can be woke on the left, and say, why, black people are being oppressed in 2022, or you can be woke right, saying that white people are at a systematic disadvantage in universities when it comes to acceptance procedures and testing and scores, and corporations when it comes to their hiring practices, and even certain judges, especially in blue states. If you're, if you're, for instance, trying to save people from someone who's threatening their physical safety on a subway, that that the law is going to come down on you in a certain way that it would not come down on you if you didn't happen to be white, and if the person that you're subduing didn't happen to be black. So anybody saying that, who's basically just, again, woke meaning awakened, anybody who's awakened to certain injustices academically, economically, corporations, hiring practices, and even judicially in our current moment towards white people, not people of color, not minorities, but towards white people. Anybody who says that, James Lindsay is going to say they're woke. They're just woke on the right. But what people are not doing, and a lot of people have followed James Lindsay in this rhetoric, and they're like, oh yeah, because here's the thing, most Americans, especially most white Americans, really are not racist.
Right. So
they're like, can we just please be done? We just want to be done talking about race. We want to be done thinking in racial categories. And so it's actually a really manipulative tactic, because what you're doing is you're actually playing on You're playing on the goodwill. You're taking advantage of the goodwill of your fellow Americans, predominantly, again, white Americans. I mean, we have statistics and graphs of the way that the average black person sees themselves in relation to white people and Hispanic people and Asian people, and then the way the average Asian sees themselves, and the way the average Hispanic sees themselves, and then the way the average white person does. And I wish we had the chart, but it's for the average white person in America. It's almost like a line. It's like where they view themselves in relation to Hispanics, blacks, and Asians, and then whites. Like all four dots are pretty much like just parallel, right in a line.
Right.
And then you look at those three other races that are described in this study: Asians and blacks and Hispanics. And for them, it's like they view their own in group. Blacks view blacks, their fellow blacks, here on the spectrum positively, and then they see it's a pretty wide gap. Here's Hispanics, and here's Asians, and here's whites. They're the worst. And so my point is that if we're just statistically talking, of course there are exceptions to the rule. I'm speaking in generalities, but in our American context, present day, 2025, white people more than any other color, more than any other ethnicity or race or whatever framework you want to use, they're the least racially conscious people in the country.
Right.
Race matters the least to white people. And pretty much that's the way it's been for 80 years.
Yep. Long time.
It's not even comparable. It's not even close. Black people think in dynamics and categories in terms of their blackness.
Yep.
Not every black person. I don't think Vodi Bakum thinks that way. I don't think Thomas Sowell thinks that way.
Right.
But again, in generalities, the average black person is their color, their race is a far bigger deal to them than the average white person.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. Generalities, group dynamics. And so it's manipulative, going back to my point, because what you're doing is you're actually taking advantage of the least racist people on the planet.
Yep.
White Americans, the least racist people on the planet. In fact, if they are racist against anyone, it's themselves. They hate themselves. Yeah. I mean, white people in America literally hate themselves. White guilt is a very, very real thing. And that's part of what Matt Walsh was getting at, is saying is if this helps us to defeat cancel culture and also to shed and rid ourselves of white guilt, and unfounded, unjustified sense of white guilt, then so be it. Then that would be overall a win. That would be a win. And so all this being said, my point is for James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson, just sitting there nodding his head, oh, so profound. And, let's go back to this Lucifer thing again. Lucifer was the first person who's woke. And so now every, person on the political right who thinks that maybe we're allowed to have a culture and a country is also woke. And what that means is that they're synonymous with Lucifer, the devil. They're satanic. Just an insane interview, absolutely insane interview. But my whole point is the reason why James Lindsay has picked up steam. It's like, how can something so moronic and so clearly manipulative and deceptive pick up steam? Well, here's the very simple answer. Because the vast majority of white people in America are incredibly wonderful people. That's why.
Yep.
That's why it's been successful. That's why this whole woke right campaign that is a deceitful, manipulative campaign, the reason why it's picked up any momentum at all is because white people in America are great.
This is how...
They're not racist. They don't want to, they just want to be kind, and they just want to think that my fellow Americans, and if you did this with anybody else, you would not, nobody would be hopping on your bandwagon. Nobody would be joining your campaign. They're only joining your campaign, not because you persuaded them, not because you can even define the thing that you're talking about. They've jumped on your campaign because you're playing off of their goodwill.
That's how neo-Marxism got sway in America. It was because one of the tactics of the neo-Marxists who came in and through the institutions, it was explicitly stated, Americans are kind, compassionate people, play on that and use that to their detriment because they will want to believe you, they will want to sympathize, they will want to, and this was happening in the 40s and 50s, and this was an intentional tactic that the neo-Marxists used to gain ground and to get their claws into the American society. It was intentionally by going after the goodwill and the good nature and the just the general disposition to consider other people's needs and hurts and situations and perspectives that was in the American ethos at the time.
Right. Yeah. America has long been an incredibly altruistic country.
Yep.
Sympathetic country. We're talking about a country which, for the record, I actually wish this wasn't the case. I wish that we had ended slavery another way. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about a country that was willing to end slavery at the cost of 650,000 of its sons bleeding out and dying.
Right.
We're talking about an incredibly benevolent people, an incredibly benevolent people. And so here's the irony. Woke right catches on and has experienced some success, some momentum for the very same, not another reason, but precisely the same reason that wokeness on the left, the original wokeness, the only wokeness that really exists, for the same reason that wokeness was successful in the first place back in 2020 and 2021 and 2022. Woke right is picking up some steam for the same reason that woke picked up steam in the summer of George Floyd. Right. Why? Because the only reason that wokeness worked, it wasn't just because
it wasn't a better argument.
It wasn't all 13% of black people in the nation joined as one, and that was enough to make every single Netflix original and every TV show and every Fortune 500 company and actual judicial rulings and elections. And it's not that 13% of the black population was so united that they were able to exert their total will against the other 87% of Americans. Why was wokeness, not woke right, but wokeness, why was it successful in the first place? Because a ton of white people hopped on board. And why did they hop on board? Because a ton of white people are really kind people.
Right.
And just the thought that someone besides themselves might be mistreated or getting the short end of the stick, they hated that.
Right.
They're like, oh no, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. I want everybody to be treated fairly, and I want everyone to have a chance. And I'm even willing to give up some of my opportunities and some of my blessings in order to make sure that somebody who maybe might be less fortunate, so that they can have those blessings as well. That's your typical white person in America.
Yep.
It is. So wokeness was successful because 13% of black people just manhandle the other 87% of the country? No, because a ton of white people, still not by much, but the majority of the United States hopped on board because they're sympathetic people. And woke right, likewise, is picking up some momentum and having some success because of the same reason. Because a lot of white people are saying, "Oh yeah, we don't want to be extra privileged, and we don't want to play the victim." So the same people who were like, if there's any victim in our country, we want to help them out, are also the very same people to say, unless we're the victim, we don't want any kind of special treatment. Because that might disadvantage or be unfair to others who are not like us. That's how your average white American thinks. Again, going back to the graph, I wish we had it, but the average white person, the way they perceive themselves and their group, their in-group, in comparison with how they view blacks, how they view Hispanics, and how they view Asians, it's just a straight line. It's just a straight line. They think everyone's the same. Everyone's the same. That is not how the average black person, again, there are exceptions, but in general, that's not how the average black person thinks. That's not how the average Hispanic thinks. And that's not how the average Asian thinks. Every other group, ethnic group in America, has a strong in-group preference. They will place themselves on one end of the spectrum, that is the end that is most favorable, and everyone else will be, there'll be a pretty wide chasm between their group and all the other groups, except, with one exception, white people. White people. And so that's for the same reason that I hated OG wokeness, again, the only wokeness that actually exists, is the same reason that I hate this new fake woke right, because the only reason either of them have picked up any momentum or steam at all is because they both prey, P-R-E-Y, on white people and take advantage of the goodwill of some of the most altruistic, sympathetic, kind, good-hearted people in the entire country. So all that being said, back to the earlier point I was going to make. If wokeness meant being awake, and then that raises the question: awake to what? Awake to the injustices towards these groups. Well, then woke right. If we're saying that it's just tomato. Wokeness over here and wokeness over there, but it's the same thing. That's what James Lindsay's trying to convey. If it's the same thing, then woke right would have to be being awake to injustices towards white people, towards the hegemony. And I just wish that people would stop for one moment and ask because we can just settle it right here and now by just asking one question, which is, well, is one of those two narratives true? Right? So woke, original wokeness, I am awake to the injustices towards minorities, predominantly black people. And now, woke right, I am awake and aware that there are actual injustices on the books towards the hegemony, the majority, not by much, but still by some, namely white people in America. So to settle the score, instead of just saying, look, they're both doing the same thing, or they're both using a critical lens, or they're both using Marxist, Hegelian dialect, blah, 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 blah. Instead of doing that, why don't we just ask, hey, are one or both or none of these two narratives true? In 2020, were police officers in mass numbers just lining up black people in the street, unarmed black people, and executing them? Because that was the claim.
That was the claim.
That was the claim. So let's just look at it. Is that true? Well, it was a complete and absolute demonic lie. Great. Okay. So now let's look over here. Because I don't know anybody that James Lindsay would call woke right who's saying they're lining up white people. And they have firing squads. Yep. And I've never heard that claim.
Right.
There were, you guys, you're forgetting. It hasn't been that long, but I know that all of us, we want to move on. We like to forget. You've probably worked really hard to forget the year of our Lord 2020, right? Mostly peaceful riots, and cities are on fire, the summer of love, St. George Floyd. You've probably worked, as I have, to forget it. But let me, walk you down memory lane for a moment. It was not just claims of saying, well, Black people don't have some of the same hiring opportunities at these companies as what no, these were not the claims.
Yeah.
No, the claims were LeBron James, they're hunting us down in the street, and they're doing it in the thousands. The thousands. The average, I remember watching the videos where people were asking, they were going and interviewing the average
man
person
on the street. Yep.
on the street, the average man on the street, Black person or white person, because again, white people are suckers, right? They are, because they're so compassionate. They, when you say, hey, they're doing terrible things to this other group that's not you, the typical white person responds by saying, oh my goodness, that's terrible. Please take all my money. Here's my house. That's how white people tend to respond because they're really kind. And so at that time in 2020, they would go and they were interviewing. You can watch video after video, ask a Black person, ask a white person, and they'd say, how many people, in this year, annually, do you think, how many unarmed Black men do you think the police have killed? And people were answering in the thousands.
Yeah.
In the thousands. They were like, I don't know, 10,000, 100,000, a trillion, a billion. I don't know. Is it even just here anymore? Are they sending troops of white people to Africa to mow them all down? I don't know, maybe a billion. These are the answers. Okay, now when we talk about the woke right, well, it's just the same thing, They're been awakened to injustices towards the hegemony and towards white. Yeah, okay, but what are the claims? Mm-hmm. The claims are, when it comes to violent crimes, Black on white versus white on Black, there's a 42x multiple. Okay, well, that's a really specific claim. So let's look it up. Mm-hmm. Can we verify it? Oh, on the FBI database, we can verify it.
Right.
Oh, so if anything, it might be higher. Actually, it might be higher. It's a conservative number. Okay. All right. Well, what about hiring practices discriminating against white people, particularly white heterosexual men? Okay. Are there any metrics on that? Can we look it up? Oh, look, the corporations themselves are writing articles boasting and bragging in 2023 saying we only hired the top Fortune 100, the biggest, biggest 100 companies in America in 2023, wrote an article, showed the numbers, and said, yes, we only hired 6%, not just white males, but white people, men and women, 6%. And 94% for the whole year with the biggest, most successful 100 companies in the country, 94% was people of color, minorities. Oh, so 2023 was probably, economically speaking, if you're looking for a job, probably a bad year to be white.
Right.
Objectively. These are the claims that I'm hearing the woke right make. But here's the difference. All the claims are substantiated. They're valid. They're true. Michael.
I think that there's an element of this. I think everything you said is right, but I think there's an element of this that needs to be considered as well. And that is people objected to woke 101 or 1.0, not only because of the claims they were making. If there would have been a guy with a sandwich board standing out on the street making the claims that Black people are being hunted down in the streets, things like that, people like James Lindsay, they would not have cared. Mm-hmm. What's underneath a lot of this is the fact that the woke movement got so much power that it was actively recreating the system that we live in. And it was, in many ways, unjustly recreating it, right? Like talks of reparations, those were getting closer and closer. And in many ways, the woke claims of then led to practices like in 2023, where companies now think it's a win that they can hold up and write a public article, we hire 94% people of color, right? Like the woke movement gained enough control and enough power and enough influence that Fortune 100 companies felt like it was a win and a public gain for their company to not only engage in those hiring practices, but to publicly virtue signal that fact. And so part of what people reacted to with wokeness was not just the claims, but the fact that it was moving away from what we said in the cold open, Enlightenment liberalism, right? And it was changing that system. And I would bet that part of James Lindsay and Jordan Peterson's critiques or wanting to kind of adopt this new term woke right is not just because of the, like, you can't argue with the numbers about the hiring and the crime statistics and things like that. Those things are not things that they could, like, you just can't debate that, right? What they are, I think, also upset about is the idea that MAGA or dissident right or new ascendant right, whatever we're calling this whole movement, is threatening the system.
Right.
And the system of Enlightenment individualism, which prizes secularism, lack of objective morality, at least in the public square, not just kind of the individualism of the innate dignity of the human being, but a radical individualism. These things were being threatened by the original woke, and they're being threatened by the ascendant right as well. We're trying to return to nature. We're trying to return to natural order. And the America that existed in the bubble of the 60s to the 90s can't be permanent, and it can't exist under woke 1 or what they think is now woke 2. And so in some sense, I think why Lindsay applies the same term is he sees people on the right talking about groups, talking about righting wrongs on a systemic level.
Right.
And he says, oh, that's exactly the same thing. They're threatening our society and our system and our way of living. And so now when any ruckus is being raised that makes similar threats to the system, or even what are perceived to be similar threats to the system, it has to be called the same thing. Pejorative term, he won, and the anti-woke people won, and they framed woke as a pejorative, and now they can level that pejorative at the ascendant right. And it does gain a lot of credit, like you said, because a lot of people have been trained to stay away from that word woke. Right. And if there's people on the right that are woke now, I want nothing to do with them.
Yes, that's exactly what's happening.
Yep.
And it's so deceitful.
Yep.
It's so, because it's not the same.
Yep.
Not even close.
Yep.
But James knows what he's doing.
Yep.
And I think there's a lot of guys on whatever you want to call it, dissident right, ascendant right, new Christian right, guys in our broader camp, who don't really want to say what I'm about to say, which is James Lindsay is having some success.
Yes.
He is.
And someone asked why we're talking about this, and it's because he's having some success.
Right. So I understand that, for strategic purposes, in terms of tactics, it might be more advantageous to just mock and laugh, and try to kind of laugh James Lindsay off the stage. That's actually, I think some guys, they're doing that strategically. They're doing that on purpose because they think that's the best method. And I think that's fine. They can take that strategy if they want to take that strategy. But I actually want to address it a little bit more seriously because, James Lindsay is having some success. And if you're like, well, how and why? Well, I regret to inform you that white women exist. And as long as white women exist in our feminized culture, then guys like James Lindsay will be wildly successful because you're talking about the most empathetic, toxic empathy group of people on the planet.
In history, probably.
In history.
I can't say that conclusively, but
probably. Yeah. So as long as white women are a category, they exist, and because of feminism have as much power as they have, then we have a major kink in the chainmail, in the armor that is vulnerable and susceptible to the pulling on heartstrings kind of tactics that James Lindsay is using. So let's go to our first commercial break, and then we'll come right back, and we're going to talk a little bit more.
What if your family's financial strategy was built on more than just numbers? What if it was built on scripture? At Private Family Banking, we believe managing wealth is more than just good planning. It's a God-given privilege and responsibility. In Genesis and Deuteronomy, and all the way into the New Testament, God calls us to be fruitful, wise, and faithful with what He provides. We help Christian individuals, families, and small businesses grow, protect, and pass on wealth anchored in timeless biblical principles to the glory of God in the advancement of His kingdom. Schedule your free discovery call today at liberationeconomy.com.
America is a country that was founded for the purpose of allowing Christians to do their duty before God and not to have their consciences ruled by the doctrines and commandments of men. Reese Fund exists in order to see the 10 Commandments properly applied, not just as a plaque on the wall, but to actually be used in business as though they're commandments from God that we're supposed to obey. Our goal is to find businesses and to buy them and to build them up. We want to find manufacturing businesses and use them to make sure that we can maintain our capacity to do things here. Reese Fund, Christian capital, boldly deployed.
All right, so what we want to do moving on into this segment is talk a little bit about who are some of these so-called woke right. We want to mark and avoid them. We want to give you guys a public warning list. Stay away at all costs.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do for sure.
No. So we're going to take a listen to a second clip from the Peterson interview, and then we're going to move into some of the responses on Twitter, some of these quote-unquote woke right as they're reacting to this whole situation. So let's roll the second clip.
Who is it angered?
Well, this is the thing. This is what has I'll use this word. This is a heavy word for the beginning of a conversation, but this is what has dismayed me. I knew it would anger the people that it applies to, in my opinion, because who would want to be called woke right, first of all? And second of all, it limits their ability to interact because they have a label that's not a good label that sticks to them. But what I'm dismayed over is that almost I hate to use this word so glibly, but what I refer to sort of as a bookmark as elite MAGA, or the more who's who of the conservative movement seems entirely captured by this as well. And they also became upset, saw me as a turncoat and a traitor against the movement.
So apparently it's all the smart right-wing people who are now woke rights.
Right.
Oh, man. So even his categorization of who it is was not even all that particular helpful. So let's take a look at Twitter and some of the people who have said, okay, I guess I'm woke right. So Nate, let's go to image number 1. This is Jack Posobiec commenting on Matt Walsh, Matt Walsh's take is hilarious. Matt Walsh says this. He says, I'm told that I'm now a member of the woke right. I still don't know what that means, but I'm hoping the perks are good. When are the meetings? Do we get a Costco discount? Someone needs to send me a brochure or something. So classic Matt Walsh.
Classic.
Tongue in cheek. Yep. Let's go to the second image there, Nate. So here, Jack Posobiec starting to offer a little bit of helpful assessment. He says woke right is a label used by embarrassed liberals to gatekeep and deplatform actual conservatives. Okay, so he's saying that
that's right.
Is in response to Matt Walsh again. So Nate, the next image I'm pretty sure is Matt Walsh's full comment that he says about that. So Matt Walsh was saying, today I did a 20-minute monologue explaining in great detail why I support the Shiloh Hendricks fundraiser. I've been denounced as racist and, quote, woke right for it by many, quote, conservatives, but not a single one of them has made any attempt to engage with my actual arguments. I don't know what the bleep woke right is supposed to mean, but I do know that reacting emotionally without engaging with the substance of the argument seems pretty woke to me. Amen. And that is such an insightful point where he says reacting emotionally against something that you don't like without engaging the substance of the argument is the epitome of woke. At least it was the epitome of woke tactics back in 2020, 2019.
Right. Like I've yet to see anybody thoughtfully.
No, we saw the clip earlier.
Engage thoughtfully, keyword. I've yet to see anybody thoughtfully engage Jeremy Carl in his book, The Unprotected Class, where he keeps a detailed log of receipts, actual receipts, and all the ways that white people, particularly white men in America, have been disenfranchised and disadvantaged, both in the realm of academia, also corporately with hiring processes and jobs, and then also even judicially in multiple court cases. And he keeps this log and shows the receipts and shows what's going on, not just once upon a time, but today, what's currently the case. And nobody has even attempted to dismantle it on the basis of substance, because they can't.
Right.
Because it's true. So that's really what it is. It's a deceptive tactic of taking a pejorative, something that really is wrong, wokeness, and then attaching it and saying to certain people that you don't like. And we'll get a little bit more into, who are these woke right people,
right,
allegedly, who are being labeled as woke right. But before that, it's worth mentioning, who is doing the labeling. So not just who's labeled as woke right, but who is labeling others as woke right. And this is the common denominator, and you need to be aware of it. Who are the people who are using this rhetoric, this pejorative, to silence? That's what it is. It's to smear and silence and isolate a group of people that they don't like and that they disagree with. So who's using this label? It's liberals. It's all the liberals who voted for Democrats for the last 30 years, but eventually, and very, very recently, in the big scheme of things, just in the last few years, found themselves in the broader conservative side of the aisle politically, because although they love every liberal principle and voted for every liberal policy for the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, they eventually, found themselves on the political right for two reasons, because I want to be fair here. One, because the left, that was always demonic, eventually got cocky and showed its hand and pushed too far. Right. So these are liberals who agree with every liberal policy you can imagine, except for
they agree with the presuppositions,
except for mutilating children.
Yep.
That's about it.
Yep.
Like once they started mutilating kids and chopping off their genitals, then these guys became right wing. So who's doing the labeling? Bill Maher, James Lindsay. It's that crew. It's all these guys who have been traditionally liberal and traditionally Democrats for a very, very, very long time, and then would claim my party left me. But I said two reasons. So here's the other one. One, the left lost its mind. Second, the right has progressively more and more moved left.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys, like James Lindsay, it's not just that he finds himself on the political right now because the left went so far left. It's not just that here's James Lindsay and the left went over here, but the right also moved. And we have to acknowledge that. The reason why James Lindsay fancies himself to be on the right side of the aisle politically and culturally is not just because of the left's demonic strategies, but because of the right's compromise. The right that would actually look at James Lindsay and say, one of us. We should have never done that.
Right.
We should have never done that. No, you're not one of us. You're an atheist. You hate God. You hate Christ. You're to the left of Bill Clinton. No, you're not a conservative. Of course not. And real quick, going earlier in the first clip we played where he said, and some of them don't say they're even conservatives. And he says that like it's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Just for the record, yes, there are some who have dropped the moniker of conservatism to describe themselves. But the reason why is because conservative in many cases has come to mean simply conserving the present.
Right.
Because conservatives did not succeed in conserving for the last, forever. So because conservatives have conserved nothing, many conservatives today, when asked, what are you trying to conserve? What they're ultimately trying to conserve is not our nation's founding.
Right.
It's certainly not the 13 colonies, and it's certainly not Christianity. It's certainly not traditional values. What they're trying to conserve is is yesterday's victory from the Democrats. That's it. Like, today's conservative is conserving yesterday's liberals' victory. So when they say, well, I'm just a conservative. When pressed, what are you trying to conserve? Well, that includes gay marriage.
Right.
That includes pornography as a form of free speech. That includes all kinds of degeneracy. So to be fair, some of the guys on our side of the aisle who are saying, yeah, I'm not a conservative, that's why.
Right.
That's what they mean. What
Right.
they mean is, no, I'm not just trying to conserve the status quo,
Right.
aka 20th century liberalism at
Right.
its peak, the chickens coming home to roost, but instead I actually want to go back. So I don't want to conserve.
Yep.
I actually want to progress. But they're not going to call themselves progressives, because obviously that would be confusing, because they're not wanting to progress to the left, but they're wanting to progress to the right, progressing not forward, but backward.
You can't say regress because that's negative.
Because that sounds terrible. Yeah. So but what they're trying to do is not merely conserve today, but actually uncover and rediscover yesterday, going back and working back. So that's why they've kind of dropped some, not all, but some on the right have dropped the conservative label.
Yeah. Something in what you were saying, Joel, I just wanted to give a pastoral individual note. If your neighbor is an atheist and he's willing to have a relationship with you, that's not what we're talking about here, right? Like, until you determine that he is rejecting the gospel avidly, if the Lord has placed someone in your life who is an atheist like James, like I would have had no problem with Michael O'Fallon saying, look, I just happen to get along with James. I'm going to share the gospel with him on an individual level. I'll have him over to my house a couple times a year. We'll grill, in the summer. Great. Mm-hmm. What we're talking about here is making these guys central parts of the resistance effort and the movement and the fight. And I get it. Like, we were desperate for people at the time. We really, the pastors, most of the pastors, I was not there yet. It's to my shame that James Lindsay was seeing these things more clearly than I was back at that time. Right? So I understand why. On the other hand, why wasn't O'Fallon partnering with Posobiec, John Harris, people like that? I don't know. So, there are reasons why there was a co-belligerency at the time. Whatever we want to say about that time, we're certainly past that time now. This is no longer the same situation. We have Christian men who are rising up, who are seeing clearly, who are speaking clearly. Not as many as we would like, but certainly more than we had at the time.
Yep. So those are the guys who are using the woke right label.
Yep.
All right. So Bill Maher and James Lindsay and now Jordan Peterson, apparently. In terms of those who have been labeled woke right, it would be like the tweets that we were using. Jack Posobiec. He would be an example. Matt Walsh apparently now is being included underneath this banner. Orrin McIntyre. James Lindsay despises him. And has labeled him woke right for at least a year, if not longer, at this point. And Orrin McIntyre was one of the speakers at our conference that we put on recently, our Christ is King conference. And I can assure you, talking with him, both on stage and a panel, but also behind the scenes privately, Orrin McIntyre he's just your traditionalist. He's just, hey, let's just get back to our founding. Orrin McIntyre loves the Constitution. He just wants, he's not a revolutionary. He's not a radical. But that's, when you're assessing something, those are some of the questions I think that are helpful to ask. Some of the, diagnostics to tell whether or not something is valid. Okay, so with your idea of woke right, would George Washington be woke right?
Right.
Would Andrew Jackson be woke right? Would John Adams be woke right? Would Thomas Jefferson be woke right? And if James Lindsay was honest, the answer would be an emphatic yes.
Absolutely.
All of the founders of our country would absolutely, by James Lindsay's definition, be woke right. They all thought in terms of group dynamics. They all recognized distinctions and differences among peoples. They, not so much Thomas Jefferson, he was a deist, but But in the case of George Washington and John Adams, they were devout Christians and didn't mince words in regards to their faith, and saw themselves as building a Christian nation with a Christian founding. All these things that James Lindsay decries, he wants you to think it's a bunch of fringe radicals that just cropped up overnight, that our country is entirely foreign to, that we've never seen the likes of, a bunch of neo-Nazis, who want to just destroy the West and want to raise a monarchy and dismantle, he's not being honest. When he says woke right, he means anybody before the 1980s.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what he means.
Yep. Which is, that's even within his lifespan. It's not like we're going back into portions of history that are so long ago that they've been lost to time and forgotten. We're not even going back that far. These are perspectives that, okay, if you want to go back to the founding, great, but they've been in America, predominant ideas much more recently than that. Not that long ago. And one of the things that I've called our time, and I hope it's changing, but I've called the time that we live in the time of the great forgetting. Right? We have forgotten so much about our country, our nation, how we used to be. The only encouragement to me is that if it can be forgotten that quickly, I'm hoping that it can be remembered quickly as well by a group of motivated people who are committed to the truth and committed to being active and vocal about the truth. So, yeah, Joel, there's another person that has been claimed woke right as well. That is our vice president, J.D. Vance.
Oh, yeah.
So apparently now even J.D. Vance is woke right. Nate, let's show image number 5, and then we're going to go to the X clip, the live one with Ilhan Omar. Okay, so this is Jack Posobiec reacting to some guy, Thomas Chatterton Williams, who himself is reacting to what J.D. Vance said. So Jack Posobiec says they're calling J.D. Vance woke right now too. And Thomas Chatterton said this about a post that Vice President Vance put on X. He said, criticize her point. This is Ilhan Omar's point, which we're going to listen to in just a second. Criticize her point all you want. This is not, quote, genocidal in the slightest. The woke right is every bit as hyperbolic as the people that they oppose. Why did he say that? Because J.D. Vance, in commenting on Ilhan Omar's interview, which we'll listen to, said this. He said, this isn't just sick. It's actual genocidal language. So the vice president says that what Ilhan Omar was calling for and saying and talking about was genocidal language, and then someone took him to task. You're just woke right. That's not genocidal. And Jack Posobiec pointed out the great irony that apparently woke right is so widespread that it is even the vice president of the United States is woke right now too. It is worth playing, though, this clip that the president was, the vice president was talking about. So this is an interview with Representative Ilhan Omar, and it pains me to have to put that title in front of her name. But Nate, if you've got that clip, we'll go ahead and roll.
I would say our country should be more fearful of white men across our country, because they are actually causing most of the deaths within this country. We should be profiling, monitoring, and creating policies to fight the radicalization of white men.
Deport. We should be deporting.
Oh my word,
Omar. Yeah, that CJ Engel raised a good point. Yep. I saw him a post on X recently where he was retweeting that clip that you just saw, and he said, just a friendly, daily reminder that Ilhan Omar, that she immigrated to the U.S. legally, she attained citizenship in the U.S. legally, and she also was elected to civil office in the U.S. legally. And so for everyone who's like, no more illegal immigration, but even more legal, no, it is worth noting that you have a woman holding a high civil office in our country who is a foreigner. One, she's a woman. Two, she's a foreigner. And three, she is asserting that white men who make up a sizable portion of the native population of this country, that they're a threat to the safety of the citizens of this country, and that they should be profiled and monitored. Right. And it seems as though she's implying surveilled, and that even political action should be taken against them. We are a country that is dominated and ruled by foreigners. We are ruled by foreigners. We are ruled by geriatrics. We are ruled by
women and children,
a gynocracy of women, and then also by children. We don't. I mean, that J.D. Vance stands out not just because of some of his views, common sense views, but another reason J.D. Vance stands out, because he's one of the only significant politicians who's a white male under the age of 140. That's what we have. We have women in leadership, children in leadership, foreigners in leadership, and then we have white men leading. Yeah, like Mitch O'Connell, who they're literally having a stroke at the podium as they're speaking because they're 140 years old. So to have one white male, heterosexual white male, in any meaningful position of power under the age of 80 is actually somewhat rare.
Right.
And you're talking about a country that is still 60% white people. And yet we're saying that this is somewhat rare. That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
So J.D. Vance is woke right. So that really, for anybody who's wondering, so who's the rest of the woke? Tucker Carlson. James Lindsay has said Tucker Carlson is woke right. There are people saying that J.D. Vance is woke right. Matt Walsh, woke right. Jack Posobiec, woke right. Warren McIntyre, woke right. Pretty much, again, anybody, if you're trying to define it, it'd be anybody who thinks in any cultural, political, or religious terms before the 1980s.
Right.
Woke right.
Right. So basically anyone who is in any way paleoconservative.
Correct. Yep. Yeah, if you think of the father of woke rightness, at least modern day woke rightness, it would be Pat Buchanan.
Yep.
They for sure would say that Pat Buchanan was woke right.
Yep.
Because he had the audacity to push back on certain mainline consensus historical views, and he also saw America as an actual nation, an actual country, people, and place, and not merely a propositional nation, not merely an idea, but a people, particular people in a particular place. So anybody who thinks in those terms, who thinks that that nationhood actually exists, there's actually a thing. It's not merely a set of propositions, but that there are actual nations that represent people and places, and that you can't just, that people are not like widgets. You can't just switch them out. Like when somebody's saying the woke right, their view of the world is that there are Americans, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, potential Americans.
Right.
So who lives in India? 1.3 billion potential Americans. That's who lives in India. These are people who think that you can simply move here, touch the magic soil, and repeat the magical incantation, the words, repeat, the Declaration of Independence and affirm the Constitution, and presto, that all of a sudden, like a spell was cast, that you become as American as apple pie. You're just as American as George Washington. Ilhan Omar and Michael, you might disagree with me on this point, and feel free to push back. Ilhan Omar, in my assessment, is not an American.
I would say we have a problem because that word means two things now.
Yes.
It means a legal citizen of America. So in that sense, we have granted her the right of being an American legally. But no, like as a people, no, she is not.
No.
And the problem is most people, this is how far we've come. Most people, when you say, is she an American? They're not thinking of, is she part of the people of America? Most people, their default way of thinking about the organization of a people in a place is the political reality, the governmental system, and the legal citizenship question. That's what most people default to. Very few people is their first inclination when they think of what, an American. Do they think of the people who have been here for a long time, the culture, the lineage, the ancestry? All they think of is, are they legally citizens of America? And that's part of the problem. Like, we need to change the perception even of when we say, is she an American? It would be obvious if you line it up with, land, lineage, all of those things. Right. No, she's not. But because our first inclination is to default to the only category that matters is a legal declaration of citizenship, and apparently you're good.
And that's what I mean when I say that there's only two categories of people on the planet, Americans and potential Americans. Because if that's what ultimately suffices for being an American, is just attaining anyone who attains American citizenship. And that is pretty much how we define it these days. That's not how it was always defined.
That's right.
But in our modern sensibilities, in the name of liberalism, that's how we've defined it, is pretty much anybody who attains American citizenship is an American. Well, by that definition, then every current non-American is a potential American.
Right.
There's not one person on the planet who does not have the potential to become an American.
Right.
At the drop of a hat. Whereas I would say, no, I will never, ever, ever, ever be a Somalian.
Right.
Even if I wanted to, and Lord knows I don't.
Right.
Lord knows I don't. But if I did, if I got hit on the head really, really hard by Ilhan Omar or something, I don't know, something happened, it's not just that I don't have a desire, it's an impossibility.
That's right.
I will never be Somalian. I will never be Pakistani. I will never be Sudanese. I'm because I'm not. Because to be a particular people means something.
Right.
It means something. Now, that's not to say that someone who's immigrated here, now we need to stop immigration, both illegally and legally.
Right.
And we need to deport preferably about 100 million people, but I know that's not going to happen, at least 30 to 40. And that would just get us back. That would just be, turning back the clock 4 years, not 40, 4 years. That's where that would get us. 30 to 40 million would just be going back, pre-Biden administration. But if we could somehow deport a bunch of people and stop both legal and certainly illegal immigration, then those who are here legally and have been here longer than, 15 minutes, those who immigrated here 20, 30 years ago from India or wherever it may be, I would argue that they too, first generation immigrants, that they will never be American in the truest sense of what it is. That doesn't mean they're not an American citizen, but they will never be an American in the truest sense of the word, particular people in particular place. However, that's not to say that their line would never produce eventually true Americans, because that's how people are forged. That's how people have always been forged. No nation is permanently static.
Yep.
Now, there are a lot of nations that aren't suicidal like ours. So there's, a lot more, solidarity and stability than our nation has experienced in the last 50 years, certainly the last 5 years. So there are a lot of nations that they're not static. No nation is static, but there are a lot lot of nations that are at least more stabilized.
Right.
They actually have borders. They actually practice, uphold their borders, and they don't let in floods and floods and floods of immigrants.
Right.
But my point is that, historically speaking, no nation is perfectly static. And what I mean by that is that every nation is, within reason, every nation is in flux. Every nation has people that leave, and every nation has people that come. And when someone immigrates legally to a nation, traditionally, they would assimilate. They wouldn't just start enclaves of, and
Right.
here we have a Somalian, camp within America. No, they would spread out. They would assimilate. They would learn the language, learn the customs. In many cases, especially when you think of Israel, according to the Old Covenant, people would convert. They would actually become worshipers of Yahweh. They would convert religiously. They would intermarry over time. Eventually, they would intermarry. And so then eventually, like when you're thinking of David, who becomes, the king of Israel, the second king in its history after Saul, who ultimately failed. So David, who's in many ways, he's the quintessential king in all of Israel's history of kings, a man after God's own heart. And he is, in every sense of the word, a true Israelite. And yet, in his lineage, he has Ruth.
Right.
Ruth marries Boaz. They have a son, Obed. Obed begets Jesse, and Jesse begets David. But by the time you get to David, it's not even 50 generations. It's like 3.
Right.
To Obed, to Jesse, to David. But by the time you get to that third and fourth generation, what you have at that point, because Ruth doesn't, notice she's a Moabite. Number one, she doesn't bring in her Moabite idols and false gods and continue to worship them. She says, your God will be my God and your people will be my people. And she doesn't come in with her Moabite husband and with 50,000 other Moabites and then set up camp right in the middle of Israel where they never even learn how to speak Hebrew and keep their own language and their own liturgies, their own religion, their own customs, their own culture, and no, she comes in, number one, through intermarriage. She marries an Israelite, Boaz. So she marries an Israelite, and then her child, Obed, is 50% Israelite. And then you have 75% with Jesse. And then you have 87.5% with David. So by the time you get to David, he's not a Moabite.
Right. No.
Not in any sense.
No.
He probably doesn't even have much knowledge about Moab's customs or culture or language. He probably doesn't even speak whatever language Ruth previously spoke. He certainly doesn't worship Moabite gods. He's not Moabite in any religious sense. He is a true blue, red-blooded Israelite. And therefore, he's fit to rule. Ilhan Omar is not David. Do you see the difference, audience? There's a difference in someone coming in legally 80 years ago and their great-grandchild being elected in civil office.
Right.
That's very different than somebody coming, even if it's legal, as it was with Ilhan Omar, but someone coming legally, first generation, and hating all the males of the hegemony of the native population of the country she's come to, and then being exalted into a high civil office.
Right.
All in one lifetime, in one generation.
Yeah.
Do you not see how insane that is?
I mean, and you use the word suicidal, self-destructive, that it's not like she came and she loved America so much. And, her parents fled communism, or she fled communism. And so she was just so indebted and she wants to embody the spirit and the soul of everything that America is. No, she hates this country.
Yeah, she
right?
does.
Like on top of all of that, she hates this country. And one of the things that we have to just realize is the time that we live in. And I don't have any great answers. I mean, we want, many, many deportations. And the reality is that's probably not going to happen anytime soon.
Probably not.
So all of this, we get that there's not great answers. But one of the things we just have to realize is nations have always been somewhat static. But what we're dealing with right now is a super compressed time frame and a huge number of immigrants and intermarrying and intermixing, not even intermarrying. But this is at a rate and at an amount that supersedes anything that happened in history. Right. Even when it was at slower speeds.
Well, the only time, real quick, that it ever happened in history, in my knowledge, is when a nation was conquered.
That's right. Yeah.
And I would say, in many ways, our nation is being conquered.
Yeah. I was going to say, even in history, when there were lower rates of intermixing, it happened in England, there were multiple, there were like 5 or 6 different peoples that formed together to create the English people that we know of today. But that happened over hundreds and hundreds of years.
Right.
And the amount of people was much, much lower. And even then, it was tumultuous.
Right.
There was strife and conflict and chaos.
And that's part of our nation's history. And
Yep.
we're not neglecting that. Right? We had waves of immigration, not necessarily right at the beginning from the founding, but we did have those periods early on.
Yep.
Right? We had, the period where all the Irish came. And guess what? The Irish were a problem.
But my point is,
And then we had the Italians, and that was but
even those waves were more, I
Right.
think, than historically would have happened in continental Europe.
Right.
Which has led to, in some ways, we are exponentially less sure of who we are as a people now.
Correct.
Than we were at the beginning, which you would think over time, the identity of a people would be congealing and
It'd be
coalescing.
solidified. It'd
yes,
become
but we are
more
going
clear.
the exact opposite direction
Exactly.
at
So-
an increasingly fast speed.
Exactly. So that was my point in bringing up the example of the Irish and then the Italians, was to say that that those at the time posed massive challenges as well. A big part of that being not just the different peoples and customs, but also religion, because America, its founding was distinctly not just Christian, but Protestant, an Anglo-Protestant culture. That is the founding culture of these United States, is an Anglo, so not just Western, right? It's certainly Western, but it's a particular subset of Western society, Anglo, British, and not just Anglo, but on the religious side, not just Christian, but Protestant. So we were an Anglo-Protestant country. That's our founding. So Italians were challenging. Why? Because they were Catholic, right? That was part of the reason. And when the Italians came, there were problems. What did the Italians do? Well, crime.
Yeah.
They became mob bosses in New York, right? And the Italians didn't necessarily assimilate super well initially. And so I'm just saying that this is part of our history that we've had. So we're not pretending that, we've just had this stable country with this homogenous stock from the very beginning. And then all of a sudden, there's this, the floodgates have been opened. No, we recognize that, it is unique when a country, it's different than European countries, when you literally discover a massive landmass.
Right.
It's just different. It's just different.
Yep.
People, because we actually needed people to come. We needed waves of people to come because at that point, they weren't just immigrants. They were settlers.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't just coming to inherit something that was already constructed and built and going to be extended and given to them, but they were going to come for opportunity to build something. And people still use that language and say, well, that's what we're doing today. We're coming for opportunity. Yeah, you're coming for the opportunity to take somebody else's stuff. That's different. People initially, with the first waves of immigration and the founding of our nation, they were coming to pioneer, the wilderness.
To lose half your kids.
Yeah, half of your kids dying, to get dysentery, to be killed by indigenous peoples who worship false demon gods, and if they were fortunate and favored by God, then maybe with their bare hands to build a cabin in the middle of the woods, hope to not be eaten by wild animals, and they might live long enough, for their posterity to eventually, to grow old and have children of their own. That's not where we are anymore, right? America is closed. We don't. We have not had a settler. All we have is immigrants. Initially, we had settlers. And even with the immigrants and waves of immigration, historically, what America would do is it would ingest a bunch of Irish or a bunch of Italian, but there would be there would be room to breathe. There would be pauses in between, and there would be time allotted for assimilation to take place. But when it's just wave after wave after wave after wave, and you can't catch your breath, and it's not just from European nations like Italy or Ireland, but it's Somalia and it's Haiti, and it's India, and it's all over, and it's third world countries, and it's different languages, and it's different religions, not just Catholic and Protestant, but where it's now Christian and voodoo, and you have them coming in waves and masses, and setting up enclaves with no intent of ever assimilating, and all of this on taxpayers' dime, right? Not settlers who coming to a new frontier in order to build something for themselves, but to take an inheritance that was accrued by someone else. That is a nation that is in the process of committing suicide. That's a nation that's conquered.
Two other things too. Something just clicked for me today. I don't know why this never clicked for me, but representation in the federal government is not based on the number of voters in a district or in a state. It's based on the total number of people living there. And so one of the reasons why immigration has been pushed so strongly is to get places like California to have just more masses of people living there. So when they knock on the door and they say, how many are here? And they say, there's 24 of us here. California gets more representation in the federal elections.
They get more of the electoral vote. Yeah.
But not only that, they get more apportionment of the House of Representatives, right? Like the Senate doesn't change, but the electoral vote percentage and the representatives does. And the second thing is, and I don't know the history here, but I'm guessing we didn't have very many first generation immigrants when the Italians were coming over and the Irish were coming over and the Chinese were coming over from the West, who were immediately being elected to federal office.
Correct.
And the fact that that is now a possibility, and not only that, but there's money and whole communities who are willing to elect these first generation immigrants into political office is totally different than the way it used to be as well.
Right. Agreed. Have we gone to our last commercial break?
Nope, we need to hit that.
Let's go to our last commercial break, and then we'll come back and let's deal with the super chat. Some of you guys have been generous, and we appreciate it. That's one of the ways that this ministry is able to continue. All of you guys interacting in the chat is a huge blessing, but especially those of you who are, even if it's small, just $5, willing to do a super chat. We appreciate that, and we always, in our third segment, try to, we can't get to all the questions in the chat. So what we do is we prioritize the super chat. So if you'd like to help us out and make a donation and send over a question or a comment in the super chat, we'll do our best to read it in this next segment after this commercial. Running your business with purpose means looking beyond last month's numbers to next year's vision. Kaylee Smith offers CFO-level strategy scaled just for small businesses. At Midstate Accounting, she takes care of your compliance, bookkeeping, and tax returns while providing holistic advisory and fractional CFO services to help you steward your resources with a distinctly Christian perspective. Ready to align your finances with your future? Then call Kaylee Smith at 573-889-7278 for a free, no-obligation consultation. Mention the Right Response podcast to get 10% off your first 3 months. Prefer to explore online? Then you can visit midstateaccounting.net to learn more or schedule a call. Again, that's midstateaccounting.net. With Midstate Accounting, you'll plan for tomorrow while operating in faith today. So call Kaylee Smith at 573-889-7278. Again, that's 573-889-7278. Are you a Christian struggling to find companies that align with your values and beliefs? Well, then Squirrely Joe's has you covered for all your coffee needs. All of their coffee is hand-selected and roasted fresh every day by a family of fellow believers. Try them out and you'll savor exceptional coffee while knowing that your investment supports a company committed to following God's teachings and upholding truth and righteousness, ensuring that your hard-earned money contributes to the growth of God's kingdom. Stop giving your hard-earned dollars to pagans who support evil. Right Response listeners have access to an exclusive deal. Your first bag of coffee is free. All you have to do is cover the shipping. So head on over to squirrelyjoes.com/right response. Again, that's squirrelyjoes.com/right response to claim your first free bag of coffee today.
All right. Welcome back. We are going to wrap up here and land the plane. Want to acknowledge some of the super chats. Thanks so much. I know Joel said it before the break, but I really appreciate all of your generosity and encouragement, and also just the fact that it is a support, a practical means that keeps us able to do what we are doing. So this is from Michael, super chat 1352. Thanks very much. Joan of Park was robbed. She was doxxed, and verbal assault attempts made upon her and her child. Her life and her children's lives are being threatened. Yes, she deserves sympathy, not the migrant and the thief. Yeah, so we would agree that the sympathy ought to be placed with her, not with this so-called victim who was stealing out of her purse.
Absolutely, and that's why we, just like Matt Walsh, and we shared, his take on Shiloh Hendricks, and saying that we agree with the GoFundMe and supporting her, that doxing for this type of issue, with racial tensions being as high as they are currently in our nation, and doxing to that degree of social security number and address and school and extended family members and all these things, really is in many ways tantamount to murder. It's putting a hit out and saying, hey, open season, somebody go and rough up her son, and if you get a little too rough and maybe one of them die, then, so be it. That is what it is. And so to be sympathetic toward her and even give toward, financially towards the campaign and all those kinds of things, and to show your sympathy through financial generosity, we support 100%.
Right.
And we've never said otherwise.
Yep. We have two from Earl Starbuck. Thanks very much. First one, $5. He says, Peterson puzzles me as he's an honest, decent man. Lindsay, I distrust. He is anti-woke, sure, but still a hard leftist on cultural and social issues. Yep.
Agreed.
And Earl Starbuck, second one, thanks very much. $2. He says, we need a 50-year moratorium on immigration. That was Stephen Wolf's solution.
Yep.
I said in my book, Biblically, here on the table, I said we might need like 2 generations, right? Or a couple of generations. And biblically, a generation's 40 years. So I tend to think 50 is a nice number in our 100-year cycle, but it might need to be longer.
Yeah, maybe 80 years.
Yep.
And history does kind of seem to have this 80-year pattern.
Yep.
Like you go 80 years back from here. It's like every 80 years, it seems like there's some kind of catastrophic major historic event. So you go back 80 years and you have, World War II.
Yep.
You go back 80 years from that, you have the Civil War. Go back 80 years from that, you have the War for Independence.
Yep.
And we're kind of at that 80-year mark, and I would not be surprised, certainly not prescribing it, not hoping for it, but in terms of predicting, not what I want, but what may be the case, we do seem like the deck is set and ripe for some kind of significant moment that may be messy.
And it seems like when you read Judges, that seems to be about the pattern. It was kind of a 2-year rotating cycle. One generation would get judged, then the next generation would forget, and then they would need judgment again. And that does seem to be kind of even in the Old Covenant Israel, a more or less loose pattern that we see there as well. So
Yep. Okay, this is one from Ninja5150.
Good to see you again, Ninja.
Yeah, good to see you. You've been in the chat before. We appreciate you. He or she said, is it a she? Okay, we're going to go with she. If you're a he, I apologize. But she said, Pastor Joel, with all due respect, I'm a first-generation immigrant, and I am more patriotic, more knowledgeable of USA history than most white women and some white men counterparts.
Also, the next comment was, I renounced my Mexican citizenship to come here and become an American, to gain American citizenship.
So I respect that. I appreciate that renouncing. That's what Ruth was not keeping, 1 foot in each of these two camps of Moab and Israel. She doesn't say your people will be my people in addition to the Moabites, and your God I'll put him on the shelf in the pantheon of all my, false Moabite gods. No, there wasn't just her laying claim to Israel's God and her people, but it was also simultaneously a renouncing of her previous false gods and her idolatrous people. And so, so I do respect that. I appreciate you saying no. I'm all in on America, and the fact that you're patriotic, that you love this country, that you let go of your previous country, and that you've taken the time to study and become knowledgeable about this country's heritage and its history. I think all those things are wonderful. And the only thing that I can think, because it seems like your comment is an objection to something that I said. So
you said that Ilhan Omar would never be an American.
Correct. So if that's what you're objecting to, then I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate your comment. I appreciate you. And what I said about Ilhan Omar still stands. And because I'm not going to have unequal weights and unequal measures, and I want to apply that consistently across the board, yes, I would apply that also to you. If you are first generation, then in the sense that I'm using the term, in the truest sense, the deepest sense, you are not American, and you will never be an American. That does not mean that you're not an American citizen. That doesn't mean that you should not have certain rights and privileges and protection under the law. It certainly doesn't mean, even if you weren't here, even if you were still in Mexico, but you're a Christian sister in the Lord, then certainly in the eternal and ultimate spiritual sense, then you're a co-heir in grace with equal dignity and eternal value in the sight of God. That applies to all people, all Christians across the globe, regardless of where their citizenship is, regardless of their place of birth. So in the ultimate spiritual sense, sister in Christ, equal. In the legal and modern day sense of American citizenship and the way that works, also equal. Equal rights, privileges, and protections under the law as it pertains to U.S. citizens. In the heritage sense, of actual nationality and ethnicity and people and place, a nation actually being people and place, and not just an assent to certain history facts, and not even just an assent to a particular set of affections and loves. I believe you when you say you love America. And I believe you when you say you know America, her history and her heritage and her laws and these kinds of things and customs. So I believe you in terms of your claim towards knowledge. And in that comment, I detect two things: a claim towards knowledge and a claim towards love and affection. And I'm not discounting either of those. And both of those things actually do matter. They matter very much to me. And so
we're very thankful for those.
We're thankful for that. I'm thankful for every first generation immigrant who's like you, who has taken the time to get to know America, who has renounced their standing and citizenship in their prior country, that has pledged their allegiance to this country, and who has affection and love for this country. That's very similar to Ruth. And so I would just say to you exactly what I believe the Bible expresses towards Ruth, that your great-grandson could be president of this nation and be a man after God's own heart and be the best president in our history. But not you.
Right.
That's all I'm saying. No disrespect. You have my appreciation. You have my thanks. But to be an American in the truest sense of people and place, it has to mean something. And if we, and this is the problem, is that if we make exceptions for the people who think like us, because you are like, you don't just think like us. From what I can tell, you're a Christian. So you're my sister in Christ. So everything in me, every inclination is to say, we're the same. And we are the same in the terms of common grace, image bearers of God. We're the same in terms of special grace as brother and sister in the Lord. And we're the same in the sense of equality under the law as citizens of this country. But we are not the same in the terms of particular peoples.
Yep.
I'm an American by birth and lineage.
Right.
And you are not. And that's okay.
Yep.
That's okay.
Yep.
But being American has to mean more than just I memorized the Declaration of Independence and I love this country more than the one I left. And to be frank, and I don't mean any disrespect, but if I left Mexico, I would love this country more than Mexico too.
Having
kind of
lived,
hard not to.
having lived around the world, I guarantee you that Ruth, even though she cleaved to Israel, I guarantee you when she got pregnant, she craved foods that she couldn't get that were Midianite foods because that's just her biological chemistry, right? I guarantee you there were certain times of the year where she said, man, I bet my family back in Midian is doing this time of year. This is their cultural thing, right? And it's not even bad that she would have been wistful or had those cravings for that food, nostalgic, all of those things.
None of that's inherently sinful.
No, and it's totally understandable. In fact, it is normal because you're a product of where you were raised and the people who raised you.
Right.
So in a legal sense, American, we want as many of those who have immigrated to America to love this country. And sadly, to our shame, you probably love this country better than many of the people who were born here.
I believe that.
Yep.
Neither of us are, I want you to hear that. Neither of us are saying that you're lying or that we don't believe you. I absolutely believe that you're more aware of American history than most people in America who are 10th generation. I believe you. And that you are more patriotic and more devoted to America than most Americans who are 10th generation. I believe that also. Absolutely. And so in that sense, you are a very helpful co-belligerent in the fight to save this country.
Yep.
And in that sense, we're grateful. But you are still Mexican.
Right. In terms of the people.
In terms of your people,
Yep.
yes.
Yep.
American citizen,
Yep.
yes. But also still Mexican.
Yep.
And we're just saying that nationality has to mean something beyond just citizenship, because that's a historic understanding and meaning of nationalities. And if we lose that, then there really is no sense of nationhood.
Right. And part of it is going to be perceived as unfair because for many, many decades in America, all it took to be an American was the legal.
Yeah,
right?
Ronald Reagan said that.
We are advocating for something different, something more natural, for something more fundamental. And so there are going to be people who feel like we're slighting them when we recognize that you're on our side, that you're joining us so that your children and your grandchildren can be truly American in their peoplehood, not just in their citizenship. So we are in a time of transition where you're going to think, well, I'm getting picked on. Well, no, we're trying to return to older definitions.
That's right. Yeah, nobody is picking on you. I promise. Well, I can't say nobody because I'm not everybody, but we are not picking on you. But Michael's exactly right that when you're trying to repent and you're trying to right the ship and recalibrate previous wrongs, you have to start somewhere.
Right.
And that always does feel like an injustice and unfair.
And it feels arbitrary. Why is it this line
Why now?
and not a year ago?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Why now?
Yep.
Like imagine that, like you think of the last 80 years and then you're the next person in line and all of a sudden, the standard changes.
Yep. They changed
right before your turn.
The height on the ride, right?
Yeah.
And you were in line
That's
for
frustrating.
hours.
But what we're saying is that the height, must be this tall to ride the ride for the last 80 years. That was wrong.
Yep.
And it's actually been jeopardizing the roller coaster. Now everybody who's on it is about to fly off the rails.
Right.
And so we have to change the rules.
Right.
And none of that is personal, and none of that bears any animosity or hatred or anything like that. Michael, do you want to keep going with the super chats?
So a couple more super chats. Thanks, Salty Sailor. Always great to see you. $5 super chat. Thanks very much. Says just great show as always, gents. Appreciate you being here, Salty Sailor.
Thank you.
Eric again, or not Eric, Earl Starbuck, $5 super chat. Again, thanks very much. Kind of continuing the discussion from previously, says, how about a constitutional amendment stating that you must be a third generation citizen to vote in elections or run for office, state and federal? That would be a great step in the right direction.
That's what we've been arguing for probably about a year now.
Yep.
And using kind of a general equity principle from the civil code given to Israel under the Old Covenant in the Old Testament. I believe it's in Deuteronomy, where there are certain rights and privileges, particularly as it pertains to worship and temple access, that were forbidden from all those who were first and second generation immigrants into Israel, that it was not until the third generation that they were fully welcomed. And so that doesn't mean that in the meantime that first and second generation should be exploited or taken advantage of, because we also have clear laws that are given to Israel about how to treat the sojourner. But first, Michael, you've said this several times, and it's simple but insightful, that the sojourner was always meant to be understood as someone who would eventually go back. They're sojourning through. So they're
traveling. It means traveler.
Right. So they're in Israel and among Israel for a time. And so long as they're in Israel, there's a few things. Number one, they can't be exploited and taken advantage by Israel. Number two, they have to abide by Israel's laws. Even the Sabbath would apply to the sojourner. It's like, well, I'm a sojourner. I don't even worship your God. Yeah, but you're here.
Tough bananas.
Tough bananas. We do worship our God. And so so you behave as a guest and we behave respectfully. So this is not to say that until the third generation that you're just a sitting duck with a target on your chest to be mistreated and disrespected. Nobody's saying that. But it wasn't until the third generation that you had fully elevated from that sojourner status to where you are now fully assimilated into Israel with all the rights and privileges. And so that's what I would advocate for is, number one, we absolutely need a full stop on immigration for 50 to 80 years, as we've already said. But once we would pick back up, and we know that's probably not going to happen, but if we were king, if we were in charge, that's what we would do. And then once it picked back up, the simple solution is that we'd simply have to have more categories. So there would be some level of citizenship that would be available to those who legally immigrate to America and love America. And for us, we would also want them to be Christian and love the Lord Jesus Christ, and love our history and love our heritage and forsaking what they've left. That doesn't mean they hate what they left. There can still be that affection and nostalgia, but they're not just having one foot in two different camps. There's a full move and departure from their previous home and assimilation into America. And then there would be some form of citizenship that would be available to them. And so they would be able to maintain that form of citizenship that would give them certain rights and privileges and protections.
Legal, same weights and measures, everything applied the same way.
Beyond just a visa or even beyond a green card, but then there would be a fuller level of, maybe you call it heritage citizenship, that would have the highest and full rights and privileges, and I would want to put voting in that category.
And this, and
holding civil office.
This has been done before. This is how Rome was. There was a different class in their society of people who were citizens. The Apostle Paul was a citizen even by birth, right? And that doesn't mean that everyone else couldn't work, couldn't live, they were even considered Romans in a sense, right? But Paul was legally a citizen by birth, and some had to buy it. That's kind of what you're saying here.
That's right. Yep. You want to keep going, Michael?
Okay, so we've got Jesse Hughes. Thanks very much. $2 from Jesse. He says, law exam, study break, cookout, RRM, great evening. Fantastic. Very good. Yep.
And then we've got one more.
Dapper Dan. Thanks very much, Dapper Dan, $4.99. He says, would you support limiting the ability to vote to married households over 30, and where the man is over 30? I have not ever thought about an age. Biblically, it's a man leaves his father and his wife, and that becomes. But property owning was always one in the beginning of America. So that property owning to me seems a little bit more of a. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, for me,
I haven't thought about an age.
So for me, age wouldn't be necessary, but I think I see what he's getting at there, and
He's looking for mature people
mature people.
Yep.
I totally get that.
Yep.
I mean, just the fact that you're legally old enough to go and die for your country 3 years before you're legally allowed to have a beer.
Yep.
Is kind of ridiculous.
So carry your own gun. You can carry the government's gun, but you can't carry your own gun.
So I get it in terms of like a practical, like pragmatic step, because our nation is so immature.
Yeah.
But I'd be hesitant to put the age piece on it, because what we want to work towards is more maturity. There was a time where 12-year-olds would go hunting, on their own, and fully capable of responsible gun use, and all these different things. And so, but we both would agree in terms of married households, because what you're doing in that sense is you're saying this person has a stake in the future, so you're not holding it, you're not withholding it to children, because it is the case that some people may not be able to have children, but you're saying those who are married, and what you're assessing there and assuming there is that those who are married, heterosexual marriage, the only kind that actually exists, but is that they if they don't have children, it's not because they didn't want to. So these are people who are the building blocks of society, of any nation, and who are vested. They have a vested interest in the future of the country. So holding the vote for those who are married households, yes. So it would be a household vote rather than an individual vote, looking at the molecule rather than the individual atom. So then that bears the question of, so which member of the household is going to cast the vote? And so we would say the head of household. And so that should be the husband, father. So we would reserve it for a married man of a household. And then what we're kind of talking about in this conversation of the episode today, I think we would further say that that needs to be someone who is at minimum third generation American, third generation American. So third generation American, male, married.
And to be clear, what we're saying is, biblically, general equity principle, someone who is of the people of America by that point.
Exactly.
So we're not even saying third generation American
legally. This is their heritage.
Yes.
Right. And what that does, so the married piece, you're insinuating, assuming children. So what you're saying is they have a stake in the future. And the third generation is saying you have a stake in the past.
Yes.
This is a person who can look back and forward.
Yes.
And says, I care and I have a vested interest in America. Both its history and its future. Its past and its future. That's what we're saying there. And then we're treating it as households, which all that is representative government. We already have that element of, we understand representative government. There are plenty of people casting votes about big decisions right now, and I don't get to cast an individual vote. I got to vote for an elected official, but then that elected official then represents me and is voting on certain policies and certain budgets and certain decisions and certain laws, and I don't get to go and represent myself. He represents me. So this concept of representative government is that's our history. The founders, none of them had anything positive to say about a raw democracy. None of them. Universal suffrage has had no good fruit. So the idea that we would be further represented, even at the level of households, is all we're advocating. So married man, third generation American, and the only last piece that I would want to add to that, I would be open to property owning, because that's just another element of having a stake in the country. But what I would for sure add on that piece is that they're not taking welfare. So they're not they're contributing and paying taxes and not taking taxes. So land owning was traditionally, that was a part of our heritage. But let's be honest, it was a lot easier to own land.
It was much easier.
Much easier. There are a lot of people who are heritage Americans who pay their taxes, are not on welfare, are 10th generation, have 5 children, vested in the past and in the future, and literally cannot own a home.
And cannot have family property passed down to them either without massive tax problems. I mean, that whole
with a 50%
Yep.
estate tax or
Yep.
something, depending on the circumstances. So, so I would be willing to be flexible given the time and the conditions where we currently are, and on the land owning piece, say tax paying and no welfare.
No welfare.
So male, married, third generation, tax paying, no welfare, and then the last piece that I would want is a public profession of Christian faith, that they're Christian.
Yeah.
That's what I would look at for a full voting citizen,
Right.
with some kind of degree, some measure of citizenship before that for first and second generation,
Right.
law-abiding, legal
Yep.
citizens,
Yep.
immigrants. So a lot of people are like,
Yep.
wow, you're a radical. But I'm telling you, as the Overton window continues to shift, it's a pretty moderate position that
Yep.
we're articulating, and grounded in tradition, grounded in scripture, and also grounded, I think, in reason and goodwill.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
All right. Well, that's all of our super chats, and we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for today. We hope that you've been blessed by this conversation, that you found it helpful, and we will see you again, Lord willing, on Friday. Thanks for tuning in.